Why have I been destined, like so many others, to bear the burden of a life in which I never asked for? Destined to walk the earth, I am exhausted. And not being any sort of special or any type of talented makes it all that much harder to bear. As a matter of fact, there's something about me that others find absolutely repulsive. And as if they can smell my stench, some of them want to scrub me clean, and some of them want to lock me away. But all of them will pay any price to avoid me at all costs. When I open my mouth, they look at me as if I'm deformed in some way, and I realize that it's not my look or appearance that seems disfigured to them, but rather my mind. And I happen to agree with them. And if I could myself escape my mind, I would. Sometimes I lose control of my mind, and it can become destructive and even violent. And by the time I regain control over my mind, I'm left in the midst of debris, alone. And alone, I would destroy even myself, except for the fact that I'm unable to do so. And in this way, I was born cursed. Somewhere along the way, though, I met, you could say, my mentor, my most beautiful teacher, and you could call them, and they showed me many curious things. But the most curious thing of all was the mode of communication. And what I mean is this: I've never met another human being that is able to answer any and all of my questions. But I ask a lot of questions, and I've met a lot of people who are willing to attempt to answer any and all of my questions, but are unable to do so because I ask so many questions. And the most curious thing about my most beautiful teacher is this: that never once has he ever even attempted to answer a single one of my questions. And what a most curious way to communicate. And I'll give you an example of what I mean so you can understand what I'm saying here. The other day, we were sitting here by the lake, just us, and I asked a question. I asked, what is it about my condition that allows me to experience so much struggle in life? And he just chuckles and says, what is it about my condition that allows me to experience so much struggle in my life? And I'm like, that's the question. And he doesn't say anything for maybe a minute, a whole minute. And then he says, did you know that there are many different types of migrating animals on planet Earth? He says, we have migrating mammals like the wildebeest, fish like the salmon, insects like the monarch butterfly, reptiles like the desert chameleon, and birds. And he points to the lake and says, like the duck. And I'm like, okay, I'll play along. Yes, sure, that's true. And he says, how do you think a duck knows when it is time to migrate? And I like to believe that I know something about animals, so I respond and say, well, the duck must be able to perceive either consciously or unconsciously a change in season. Perhaps there is a change in temperature which affects the duck's food source, maybe causing a scarcity. So the duck decides to leave in search of greener pastures, you could say. And he says, do you happen to know the diet of a duck? I said, sure, man. Um, Ducks eat a lot of different things, like certain amphibians like frogs and salamanders, tadpoles, and they even eat small fish They eat snails and slugs and various insects. They even filter the water for microorganisms and eat algae and certain aquatic plant roots, this type of thing. And he says, wow, that's a lot of different um, variety there. He said, curious, isn't it, that even a duck possesses a personal preference when it comes to taste? I said, what do you mean? He says, well, for example, let's say we have two ducks and we have one pond, and this one pond is abundant in both tadpoles and algae in different locations. He said, isn't it possible that one duck may prefer algae over tadpoles and one duck may prefer tadpoles over algae? I said, sure, that's possible. And he said, and in this way, by following their own personal preference and taste, by never questioning the integrity of their mind or nature as a duck, wouldn't they minimize the need for competition or struggle when it comes to nesting sites? And I'm like, okay, I'm not following. What do you mean? He said, well, because one duck prefers algae, it will make its nest closest to the spot where the algae is blooming. He said, and one duck that's preferred tadpoles over algae will make its nest near where the tadpoles are. And in this way, they can coexist and reduce the need for struggle there. I said, okay, I get it. Yeah, sure, that's true. And he says, now, also in the same way, by never questioning the integrity of the mind of a duck, by following its nature, its preference in taste, won't the ducks also minimize the need for competition or struggle over certain sources of food? And I said, yeah, this is all true. Everything that you've said about the duck is true. But can I ask you, how did we even start talking about ducks? And he looks at me with this funny look and says, I'm not positive, but I'm sure that you brought it up. And I'm just like, until next time, I hope you continue to free your mind.